and Iraqi Prime Minister expressed concerns over global energy stability amid escalating Iran-Israel conflict as per Kremlin, while Israeli forces struck IRGC headquarters and power systems in Tehran. Russian strikes killed 10 people in Kyiv region and 2 in Odessa, injuring dozens, including 12 in Odessa. According to Ukrainian officials, as President Zelensky in the UK and has met with Prime Minister Keir Starmer and King Charles III. Putin warns US strikes on Iran are driving the world towards great danger and says Moscow will support the Iranian people after meeting Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who delivered a message from Supreme Leader Khamenei in Russia, according to media reports. US Embassy in Qatar urges Americans to shelter in place amid Iran-US tensions, while Qatar claims situation remains stable. Meanwhile, airlines weigh Middle East cancellations, including Finnair canceling flights to Doha until 30th June, according to media reports. Oil prices dipped briefly as markets await Iran's response to US strikes, while the IAEA sought access to Iran's nuclear sites amid concerns over highly enriched uranium, according to media reports. Iran's parliament backed closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The European Securities and Markets Authority Chair Verena Ross told Reuters that EU member states remain divided over granting the ESMA more supervisory powers despite board support for an investment union, highlighting ongoing fragmentation in Europe's capital markets. China has accused Taiwan President Lai Ching-te of spreading heresy and provocation after he declared Taiwan is, of course, a country, while also warning that the US strikes on Iran have damaged Washington's credibility and could cause a dangerous spillover of war, according to media reports. NATO leaders at the Hague summit are set to back a 5% GDP defense spending goal to appease US President Donald Trump, but recent US strikes on Iran threaten to overshadow the agenda. According to media reports, Spain has objected to the new target. As tensions rise in Iran, US President Donald Trump is set to meet his national security team later today at the White House to prepare for any possible Iran retaliation. Earlier, Trump has hinted that Iranians should consider overthrowing their government if it refuses to negotiate on its nuclear program. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt said that the president is still interested in diplomacy, but warned there could be consequences if Tehran stays defiant. If the regime won't come to a peaceful solution, why shouldn't the people take away the power of this violent regime? She asked. This comes just days after US bombers joined Israel's campaign striking Iran's secretive nuclear enrichment facilities. Trump hailed the risky bombing run a spectacular military success, claiming monumental damage had been inflicted, though that claim has not been independently verified. Top US officials insist the goal is not regime change, but on Sunday Trump posted online, "Why wouldn't there be a regime change?" in sharp contrast to earlier messaging. Iran denies any intent to develop nuclear weapons, saying its program is purely civilian, but the West continues to accuse Tehran of covert ambitions. Meanwhile, Trump also pressed Republicans to pass his tax bill before July 4th, saying the party is more united than ever. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Scott Fulner, he's head of Eagle Enterprises, a security firm, joining us live from Washington. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. As a security expert, how seriously should we take the possibility of an Iranian retaliatory attack on US assets, either abroad or domestic?
I think we should take it seriously that Iran is a wounded animal right now and it's going to strike out. The question is that with basically new military and intelligence leadership, because over 40 of their top generals and intelligence officers have been killed in the last week, how will the new group of leaders look at their chessboard in terms of knowing that if they attack U.S. assets in the region, or they have sleeper cells in the United States, that America will definitely take on a much more aggressive stance in responding to that. So they need to be thinking through not only the next step, but the next 5 steps. But it's a very, very dangerous moment right now.
And building on that, what kind of targets would Iran likely prioritize if it chooses a direct response? Will it be military bases or oil infrastructure and or embassies, knowing that Qatar's U.S. embassy has issued a statement saying for the diplomats to stay inside?
I would think that if I was sitting there in the Iranian circle, I would say, let's go after infrastructure. Let's look at American ships. Let's look at American port facilities in the different Persian Gulf states, and try to basically anticipate U.S. response, try to cripple the ability for the U.S. to respond. I would think that would probably be their main thing, to go after civilians, to just simply build up a big body count. I think that would just inflame the United States to the point where they'd be taking out all of Iranians' oil and gas facilities, all their port facilities. I mean, it would definitely be a huge escalation if Iran strikes.
And how significant was the strike on Iran's enrichment facilities? Did it really damage Iran's capabilities or just provoke escalation, according to you?
I think it crippled it. The damage assessment so far shows that there probably should be another round of attacks to take these out fully. The other part of the issue is that certainly in terms of the facility at Fordow, they had 15 trucks lined up about 2 days before the attack. So the question was either nuclear material or equipment taken out of that facility before the bombs fell. So there's a possibility that Iran was beginning to disperse their assets, nuclear assets, before these attacks. But the attacks had to happen. I mean, Iran is too close to having nuclear weapons. Something had to be done to cripple it. We now need to find a way to end it. And probably the only way to truly end it is regime change.
And according to you, how long do you think this cycle of escalation could last? Are we looking at a protracted conflict through this summer, or will it be longer or shorter?
It's total speculation. If there is no regime change, then we're looking probably at least a 30 to 60 day window of activity until Iran is starting to really deplete its ballistic missile supplies. So and with Israel taking out more and more of their launchers, attacking and taking out a lot of their storage facilities, Iran's ability to respond is starting to decline dramatically. So it could be like a 30-day window before things start to exhaust.
And now, is there a realistic scenario in which this spirals into a direct US-Iran war, or do you believe both sides will pull back somehow if there's more interventions or mediators?
I personally would not trust Iran on any front. Any hunk of paper they sign, I think, is worthless. They have been a bad actor in the region since their revolution in 1979. They are, one of the upsides in all of this conflict so far is that it really has depleted Iran's ability to support their 3 clients, the Hezbollah, the Houthis, and the Hamas. So that helps Israel's security on one front, and really the security of the region. So on the other front, I don't trust Iran at all. Again, if we don't have regime change, I just don't know what we can do beyond just trying to keep depleting their ability to attack. We've allowed Iran to get a lot further along than we should have, and that includes 4 years where we did nothing under the Biden administration. And I think that if we hadn't acted now, it may have been too late.
And according to you, what do you think could be the outcome of the current meeting that's taking place with with NATO?
Well, I think that everybody is trying to look at the chessboard, and a grandmaster in chess usually thinks 10 moves ahead. I think that between the National Security Council with Trump, with the NATO allies, with Israel, I think everyone is in essence thinking through what are not just the next move, but the next 10 moves, and how do we get to the point where Iran is neutralized on one front or changes enough internally to rejoin the family of nations. I mean, the people of Iran have been oppressed, just like the people in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe were oppressed for decades under the communist regimes. And so the question is, how do we help the people of Iran take control of their future and bring back peace and stability to the region?
Thank you very much, Scott Fulner, for joining us and bringing your expertise as a head of security expert from US. Now we move on to our next story. Tensions in the Middle East have escalated following US airstrikes on Iran's key nuclear sites. Iran has vowed to retaliate, raising questions about what comes next. Iran has warned that it will strike US military installations in the region. Key bases like the US Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, and Camp Arif Jan in Kuwait could be targeted. These bases are essential for US operations, and any attacks on them would put American personnel at risk. In addition, Israel is reportedly preparing for potential preemptive strikes against Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, aiming to reduce Iran's military capabilities. Iran could also activate its allies, including Hezbollah and Shiite militias, to target Israel's potentially opening multiple fronts in the conflict. On the global stage, China and Russia have called for restraint from both sides, while reportedly backing Iran's position. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion: Lieutenant Colonel Avital Leibovich, Director at AJC Jerusalem and former IDF spokesperson to international media. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Is Israel ready for a multi-front war with Iran directly and with proxies like Hezbollah in the north?
Well, it's interesting that you're asking, because approximately an hour ago, Naim Qassem, which is the leader of Hezbollah today, gave an interview. And in this interview, he speaks about the solidarity of Hezbollah with Iran and the fact that all the Arab countries should back up Iran because Iran is the winner, according to this Hezbollah leader. But what I haven't seen in his response is that Hezbollah will actually take action. And we are here already 11 days in this war with Iran, and Hezbollah haven't fired one missile since we began this war. And I don't anticipate they will do so. Don't forget that we have fought Hezbollah for a year and a half before this, and they are very weak. They lost a significant amount of their arsenal of rockets, as well as their special units, as well as their warehouses, launching pads, launchers, and other assets as well. And I really don't see any logic in any intervention in the current war. So I don't see Hezbollah rushing in any way to fulfill its original role as a proxy of Iran. And only, I think, we will see support messages which are in writing but not in practicality.
And now looking at diplomatic channels, according to you, what diplomatic channels, if any, are still open to avoid a regional war, and does Israel see any value in them?
Well, of course, Israel it prefers always diplomacy. Unfortunately, you are aware that diplomacy failed with Iran. I think President Trump gave 60 days to negotiations, and Israel waited those 60 days. At the end of the day, it was an existential threat. Iran is an existential threat not only for Israel, but also globally. Now, what will happen after the war? I'm hoping that Khamenei will decide to climb down the tree and sit around the table and reach some major concessions. One thing is clear today: the ballistic missile arsenal that Iran has accumulated in the course of the years, as well as the nuclear capacities, they could no longer exist because they pose a threat to the entire world. So Khamenei really has a dilemma. Will he be willing to keep his regime but make concessions, or will he choose continuing and fighting? In that case, in both cases, Israel will be ready.
And now building on that, how does the Israel's public view this escalation? Is there support for a longer campaign against Iranian forces, or are there voices that are against it?
Well, it's a great question. You know, this is not easy for all of us. The missile attacks are waking us in the middle of the night. Last night it was 3 a.m. This morning it was 10 o'clock in the morning. It's unexpected, and it's scary because you are sitting in a shelter and then you are hearing the sounds of explosions outside of your house. The state of emergency in Israel is quite high. Working places are closed. The education system is shut down. Basically, you can go to a supermarket and come back home. So most of the people are staying at home. But despite of all of these difficulties, I do want to highlight the resilience of the Israeli people. I think the vast majority of the Israelis are in support of the current war. I think Israelis understand that we don't really have any choice but to cripple these threats, which at the end of the day can harm us and can destroy Israel. And so I think there is still, despite of the difficulties, I would say there is a majority of support, by the way, including the political parties from the left wing, from the right wing, pretty much supporting the decision of the government to engage in this operation. And everybody, of course, is hoping for a safe end and also for a diplomatic outcome.
And now building on that, from your experience, what's the level of readiness inside of Israel for a larger scale missile or drone barrage?
So in 1991, actually, when the Gulf War began, and Israel was not a part of it, but Saddam Hussein at the time decided to fire Scud missiles to Israel. And that was the first time that the Israeli government understood that the home front, the people, the population, will be a target of terror groups and anti-Israeli countries. And that's the reason why the home front command has been built. And there were a lot of regulations that were taken. One of them, for example, is that every single building, residential or public, that was built in Israel after 1992 needs to have a shelter or a safe room inside. So a large percentage of the population has shelters. Many of the cities here have public shelters. And we have an app, and the app actually beeps and gives us sufficient warning so we can prepare and go to the shelter. Today, if a ballistic missile is fired from Iran to Israel, we have a good 7 minutes of prior alert, so we can always prepare, go to the shelter, not rush it. people with families with kids could take their time. So I would say we are well prepared.
And now, last but not least, how vulnerable is northern Israel to a Hezbollah-led offensive if Iran decides to open a Lebanon front, knowing that in the past there has been conflict with Hezbollah over there?
Look, I think those 30 years in which Iran built proxies in the region, whether it was Assad in Syria, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, whether it's Hamas in Gaza or Islamic Jihad in Gaza and also Lebanon, I think those days are gone. And these proxies today are weak. I don't see them endangering the remaining of their soldiers in the name of Iran. There is a new government in Lebanon, and that government sent loud and clear messages to Hezbollah to stay out of this war, and I think that's the way it's going to stay. Now, just to be sure, there is a ceasefire agreement in place, which both countries need to respect, Israel and Lebanon. The Lebanese army is deployed now on the border of Lebanon. Will this be enough? I will not sign on it in 100%, but there's still a major progress of today than compared to, I don't know, 2 years ago. So I'm optimistic after all. And also, listen, at the end of the day, the people of Israel have nothing against the people of Lebanon and nothing against the people of Iran. These are countries that have been hijacked by a terror group, Hezbollah, or by a vicious regime in Iran. And I do believe that the potential of one day of laying down the barriers and maybe expanding the Abraham Accords will do wonders for the region, for the people of both countries.
And Lieutenant, do you see a scenario where this escalation could spill over into a broader Middle East war, which we see that a lot of countries are voicing their opinion on this now? And what would Israel's priorities be in that case?
I don't see how it will spill to other countries. Syria is a very weak country in terms of a military capability. Jordan is not identified in any way with Iran, neither is Egypt, and Lebanon, as I explained, is not interested to be engaged. So I don't see any spilling of that source. I think that if Khamenei will decide to target American bases, I think they will pay a very high price for it, and I hope they don't take that decision for their own sake. But I don't see it really spilling all over the Middle East.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Avital Leibovich, for joining us and bringing your expertise to our conversation today. Now we move on to our next story. Ahead of the NATO summit, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stressed that Tehran should not be allowed to have a nuclear bomb. As Israel and Iran exchanged fresh strikes on Monday, he said his greatest fear was that Tehran had a nuclear weapon, which would give it a stranglehold on Israel and the rest of the world. However, he also dismissed suggestions that the war in the Middle East would deflect attention from the summit of the 32 NATO leaders. Rutte also noted that Iran was heavily involved in Russia's war against Ukraine. Meanwhile, shifting focus to the defense spending, which will be the key discussion at the NATO summit, Mark Rutte has said that new defense spending pledge will be announced at a summit in The Hague. Following this, publishing a letter from the alliance chief, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has insisted Madrid will not have to ramp up defense spending at the same rate as other NATO countries. NATO diplomats have disputed Madrid's view that it was granted an exception, but Sanchez backed up his claim by posting on X a letter from NATO chief Mark Rutte. The pledge is seen as key both to satisfying Trump, who has threatened not to protect allies spending too little, and helping NATO build up the forces it needs to deter Russia. Before we dive into the discussion, let's listen into what Mark Rutte has said.
The defense investment plan that allies will agree in The Hague introduces a new baseline, 5% of GDP to be invested in defense. This is a quantum leap that is ambitious, historic, and fundamental to securing our future. The new defense investment plan is the key deliverable for this summit and will be decisive when it comes to ensuring effective deterrence in defense.
Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Ross Feingold, he's a political analyst joining us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for joining us today. Good to see you. Does NATO have a coherent policy on the Middle East, or is it reacting on case-by-case basis, mainly through U.S. leadership?
I think some of the NATO countries are very reluctant to endorse President Trump's decision to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities. Now, a few countries have said supportive things, most notably Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the United Kingdom. But I think other countries, that even the ones that opposed Iran having a nuclear weapon capability, they're really reluctant to give up diplomatic negotiations unless they feel that President Trump was too quick to engage in this. Generally speaking, they also don't want this to become a NATO issue. They want this to be a United States versus Iran issue and not a NATO versus Iran issue. So there are definitely some competing interests with regard to how the NATO members who are attending this summit this week, but how they approach their views with regard to President Trump's decision to attack Iran.
And now building on your own answer, could it drag NATO countries into a broader confrontation, the Israel-Iran-US conflict? And is there a real risk that the Middle East war could distract NATO from its core objective, containing Russia in Europe?
I think countries that want to be critical, they're going to have some very careful thoughts about doing that publicly, because they don't want to offend President Trump. President Trump made the decision to bomb Iran's nuclear weapons research and development facilities. And I think countries in NATO that even the ones that don't really like that idea, as I said, I think they're going to be very reluctant to publicly criticize Trump. They might do it behind closed doors. They might whisper it to media. But I think the prime ministers or presidents that are assembling in The Hague, they'll be reluctant to criticize President Trump publicly. With regard to the risk that it shifts attention from Ukraine, I think enough of the NATO members are really committed to Ukraine that that's going to be a counterweight to any possibility that focus might drift towards the Middle East. Countries like the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, which are really the biggest military powers in Europe, I think they remain very united and very committed to assisting Ukraine. Although there are limits to the amount of support they could provide Ukraine in terms of ammunition or weapons or even cash, they're still very committed to doing that. And I think they're going to speak up at the meeting, even if they know President Trump is not open to it. But I think these countries, when it comes to Ukraine, they're going to continue to speak up.
You kind of suggested that NATO is not as divided as it seems now, but is Spain undermining NATO unity by claiming an exception to defense spending while publicly posting the NATO chief's letter to Spain?
Yeah, Spain is one country that's been very outspoken, or its prime minister specifically, has been very outspoken against the 5% target spending for defense. He's laid out his reasons. He doesn't want it to detract from social spending, and he is a left of center prime minister, so social spending is very important to him. We'll see what happens when the leaders convene, but it looks like Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, he's very set on pushing this through. And I think the larger military powers, not just the United States, but countries like the UK, France, and Germany, and Italy, I think they're very much on board with raising NATO members' individual defense spending to 5% of GDP.
Thank you very much, Ross Feingold, for joining us today and sharing your expertise as a political analyst. Now we have a breaking news. The Chinese embassy in Qatar has reminded the Chinese citizens to strengthen safety precautions. Meanwhile, the British government issues warning to UK citizens in Qatar to shelter in place until further notice. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from